What is important in your opinion in this new document, this national security strategy? You remember during the Biden administration, they were talking about autocracy and democracies. And right now, the tone, as you've mentioned, has totally somehow changed. And how is that going to be helpful if they decide to implement what they're talking about in this document?
It gets us off the path to nuclear war. You can't stay forever in conflict with a military power like Russia and continue provoking and attacking and causing all kinds of difficulties without the situation finally getting out of hand. And it's like I said in my article this morning, if we can take this document seriously, then the Union of Atomic Scientists can move the hand on the doomsday clock, which I think is like a second or two to doomsday. They can move it back a couple of hours. And so this would be a huge achievement. If we can get off of this path to nuclear war that we've been on ever since the Wolfowitz Doctrine was declared. And so by abandoning this uh, war-prone document of hegemony or policy of hegemony, uh, we've changed the course of the world. And Trump is emphasizing competitiveness, economic competitiveness between nations, and giving up this claim that we can invade everybody in order to bring democracy. And we can bomb countries to bring democracy and overthrow countries to bring democracy. So this is an abandonment of the neoconservative policy that has been in place since, I think, 1991. So I see that as a huge change, if it means anything. That's why I wanted to question Larry, because he pays more attention to that, and it's more in line with his experience. Like I say, I didn't have to know. I had colleagues I could ask. And I see other very important things in there. He rejects the whole DEI process. He says if we don't have merit-based uh, appointments and jobs, will be bypassed by countries that do. And it's correct. We are being bypassed. And I thought, too, it was an affirmation of it is legitimate to have ethnic nationalities. You don't have to be a Tower of Babel in order to be justified. I thought this was very important. He was speaking of the cultural and spiritual health of the Western world. And to see that kind of important point brought out in a national security strategy, I thought was amazing. That's an extremely important development, that we don't have to be some sort of multicultural Tower of Babel in order to be justifiable, and that nationalism is justifiable. In fact, it's the only way you can have a country, because the Tower of Babel is not a country. There are no common interests. There's no way to even have a common law. And we see this in the countries where the population has altered dramatically. There are now large numbers of Muslims. They're imposing Sharia law. And we now see courts being accepted that rule on that basis, even though that's not the basis of the law of the country. So when the document speaks of European civilization being erased, that's exactly what's happening. It's what's happening. It struck me when it said that in 20 years or less, Europe will be unrecognizable. Well, that means the end of NATO. Then how do you have NATO when you don't have a nation, when you don't have a unity of nations? You've got a collection of what? Multicultural towers of Babel. These are not countries. So if this process of the Americans going in, bombing countries, driving all the people into the United States, all the people into Europe, all of those countries simply disappear. There won't be any Western world. There won't be any United States. I mean, just look at all of the publicity now coming out about the Somalis in Minnesota, the extraordinary scandals, the corruption, the way they um, raid federal payment systems and send the money abroad to terrorists. This is all in the news now. Um, Minneapolis, one city, the Biden regime located 80,000 Somalis there. They're essentially taking over. So, for this to be unrecognized for so long, and nobody dares mention it because you'll be called a racist or something, or a nationalist today is a Nazi. If you believe in a national government, it means you're a Nazi. See, this is the way they've got the terms. Well, this national security document looks at these problems in a realistic way and acknowledges. So these are far bigger threats to the West than Russia or China or Iran or any of the kind of excuses they create for massive armaments expenditures, from which they rake off all kinds of commissions and, and all sorts of unaccountability. Anytime you're faced with a threat, you can hide all information simply by saying national security. You don't have to release anything. And the system it doesn't want to give up this extraordinary protection. But if you don't have a threat and you're carrying on illegally or badly, it's hard to say, oh, this is a national security matter. But what is the national? Who's the threat? So getting rid of threats is not convenient for the powerfully established, institutionalized forces that have used this for so many decades. So that's my take on it.
Paul, when you mentioned, the immigrants, those people who are not part of the culture, the dominant culture of a country, going there and they want to somehow make some sort of changes. But after all, look, you mentioned Somalia. Look at Somalia, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. These countries were destroyed, were robbed. In Syria, before the fall of Assad, who was stealing the oil of Syria and sending them to where?
The United States, of
This
course.
is the problem, Paul. This is the problem. The root causes of these all of these problems that you mentioned is that the people have no conditions in their country to live. This is the
That's what I
but
said. I said we went there and bombed everybody and created floods of refugees. Um, so it's a policy that comes back and destroys yourself. We shouldn't have done that. We did it for Israel. It was see, people don't really understand the true cost of the United States serving Israel. And the cost is it's flooded the entirety of the Western world, all of Europe, the United States, Canada, with people who are not assimilated. And they're in such huge numbers, they can exist without having to be assimilated. And they come from countries where corruption is the norm. That's what they know. And that's what we see unfolding in Minneapolis. We're seeing these elements who basically milk federal programs, and the money leaves the country in briefcases, cash in briefcases, and goes to terrorists abroad. So when you a country that brings that on itself and its allies, I mean, it's completely stupid. And who benefited? Israel. And who's paying the cost? All of Europe and the United States. And oh, you can't say that. That's anti-Semitism. So you can't say the truth. You can't. Everyone's afraid to mention it. You can't discuss what's actually going on. Well, if you can't discuss what's actually going on, then you don't know what's going on, and you don't even know what's going to happen to you next. So, you don't need to be making excuses for these refugees needing somewhere to go. Um, but it would have been much better to say you'd have been cheaper and no threat to the nationalities in Europe and the United States, to have kept them there and rebuilt the country you destroyed. The cost of the welfare systems to support all these millions of refugees is huge. Is huge. It'd been cheaper simply to use that money and rebuild the countries, and to use the labor of those people to rebuild the countries, so they'd be paid good wages. That's what should have been done, not just remove all borders and be overrun. Um, but it happened because of the liberal left. The liberal left has been attacking Western civilization for a long time. And essentially, if you go to a university any time since I went there, you just learn the West is evil and it has to be replaced. That's just what the story is. And so all the influx of foreign people is just part of replacing the evil white supremacist, racist, exploitive countries that need to be replaced. So there was no intellectual or ideological opposition to the overrunning of Western countries. And so, being no opposition, it never occurred to anybody, why don't we just rebuild their countries that we stupidly and evilly destroyed? That's what should have been done. And it would have been cheaper. You just think about all the bills hard-pressed taxpayers all over Europe and the United States are paying to house people in hotels, to provide medical care, and to give them debit cards with money on it so they can provide for themselves. And it's an endless expense.